Hi again, it's Dr. Matthew Merritt here, and this is an asynchronous lesson on building assessment rubrics. Let's get started. So, this weekend we've been talking a lot about the features of well designed performance tasks, and you have at least one in your group that your team has developed. So, now what? What do you do with that, right? If the task provides the opportunity for your students to transfer their learning, to show their understanding, you need to now find a way to capture that assessment data. And this is where the rubric fits in perfectly. A well designed rubric is where the student's understanding is captured, and a well designed one provides feedback at the same time. So let's take a look at sort of the basics of what's called an analytical rubric, and we'll use a picture to sort of define the features. So here you see a picture of a typical rubric. There are many kinds. This one happens to be an analytical one. Analytical ones are set up in a table similar to the one that you see here. This is the most common type and provides quite a bit of information to both the learner and the assessor. Okay, this is the kind that you'll be creating today and tomorrow. Okay, the features of this that you'll see is it's both kind of text. There's text there, but it's also visual. This can really be helpful to the learners to distinguish between the different parts of the rubric. So what's here? Well, we start with the title, okay, and the title is typically the same name as the performance assessment. Next, we see criteria, and they tend to run along the left column. For this project or this example, the criteria that are going to be assessed is organization, content, teamwork, and presentation. Typically, you want to have somewhere between 3 to 7 or 8 different criteria. If you have too few, then there is not a big enough distinction for the students to understand a depth of understanding. Okay? If there's too many, then there's too much information, and students will get overwhelmed with trying to meet all the different criteria. So somewhere between 3 or 4 to 7 or 8 is ideal. Next, we have performance levels. These are usually assigned numbers 1 through 5 or 4 or whatever. Okay. Typically, we see in a rubric somewhere between 3 to kind of 7 different ones. And again, too few, we're not giving the students enough information to succeed. And too many, you find that it's difficult to distinguish between levels. So again, somewhere between 3 to 7 is ideal. Then number 4, you have where the majority of the text lives is in the descriptors. Okay, this is really the heart of the tool, the advantage of the tool. In each of these boxes, you'll find anywhere between kind of 1 and 3 sentences that are written in as clear and as objective language as you can. Okay, all rubrics will have these 4 parts. Okay, so why build a rubric, right? Why not just tell a student how well they've done? And by no means should you not have that level of feedback. But a well-constructed rubric can also help in providing that feedback in a very objective and clear way. So some of the advantages are, one, it communicates the level of expected work. Okay, so what you want your students to target, you usually make one kind of column that's not necessarily right up at the top, but is pretty close to the top, and you can actually call that sort of your expected level of performance. Here I've highlighted it in purple. Okay. Number 2, when the learner is able to read what the criteria are, they get a better idea of what the intent of the task or assessment is supposed to be. They understand what's going to be important to you. And that's important information for the learner. Number three, it removes some of the subjectivity that often comes with grading, right? So if you can be more objective in your grading, the students and the learners will feel like there's more fairness into what's going on. If you use a rubric, you won't hear your students say, well, why did you only give me a C on that exam, right? The reasons why whatever score is given is pretty clearly communicated through the rubric itself. Okay. Number four, the feedback is instant because the student has the rubric with them. They understand very quickly what's missing from their project, what went well, and probably more importantly, they can peek at the next box up and see what they can do to improve the next time or the next draft. Okay, so this instant feedback and rich feedback is really important. And finally, and maybe most important, number five, there's more efficiency available to the teachers when they grade using a rubric. You can imagine you could line up all the projects together at one time and go through and just look for one criteria point, right? Look for all the organization in all of the projects at one time. Your grading becomes much more efficient as you work through the rubric. Also, the descriptors allow kind of anyone to take the project and help you assess it, right? The vocabulary is clear. Students can talk to each other using that accurate vocabulary, and can talk about each of the features of their project. You won't hear students saying things like, oh, I got a lower grade because I forgot to talk about those things that you add at the end of a sentence that makes it sound like you've raised your voice, right? The vocabulary is clear, and the students can speak to each other in more objective ways. Also, there's more flexibility and diversity in who and how the rubrics can be used, right? First, and very importantly, learners can assess themselves. You can provide the rubrics very early in the unit, and as the project is being developed, students can quickly see and assess themselves based on the levels of the rubric and the descriptors. Also, consider having peers assess each other. It's very easy at the end of the project to give the rubric to a group of people, peers or even experts from outside, and allow them to provide focused and meaningful feedback to the project participants. Okay, and if I were to ask each of you in this class right now to assess each other on anything, right? If one of you gives a speech or a presentation or a piece of writing, what would most of you say? Well, most of you would be like, "Oh, you did great," or she was perfect, right? That's nice feedback, but it isn't terribly helpful, and it doesn't really help that person grow. Where if you used a rubric, you could provide a little bit more focused language and focused feedback for the performance. So those are the advantages, right? So how do you build a rubric? It's a good question. And really, this is a slide that you kind of want to come back to when you start to build your own rubric, because there's a series of questions that are important to ask and answer, and they will help you construct a well-formed rubric. And as we spoke about this weekend, it'll also help you maintain that idea of alignment. Okay, so first question is, how detailed do you want your feedback to be? Depending on the task, you might want to give more or less feedback to the learner, and that's based on how specific the skills or the understanding that you're looking for are. Number two, what understanding do you want the students to be able to display in this project? The detail of the feedback will come back in will be shown in your descriptors. The different aspects of what you want your students to show their understanding of will come through when you write the criteria. Okay, so more criteria means the project will have more aspects and be more complex. Are all the tasks equally important? Okay, so back in the example, there was a row for organization and one for presentation. You might decide that the organization of the project might be more important than how well it's presented. So you can weigh those rows differently, right? So maybe the presentation row will only get half the points, or you'll take the final score and divide it by 2 when you calculate the final grade. And again, you want to make that clear at the beginning of the project. What level of understanding do you want or expect? What you would find exceptional and what you're willing to accept. Those will really come out in the top of each column when you put together your performance levels. What does a 3 mean? What does a 4 mean? Okay, and so when you label those performance levels, these are some terms that you could use, right? This is what's expected. This would be exceptional, etc., etc. Do you want to get one final grade at the end of the project, or is the feedback better given based on each of the criteria points? There's nothing that says you have to add up the numbers and give them a final number or grade. The feedback might be more useful, especially if it's formative, with each row. Okay. And then finally, some of the things that we spoke about when we looked at your school mission. Do some of those things fit into this task, right? We talked about collaboration and the skills and knowledge that you would see there. What about creativity? Are these things needed to complete the task well? And will they be part of your stage 3, your learning plan? Will you take the time to teach what it means to be collaborative? If the answers to those questions are yes, then you should think about adding a row or a criteria based on that skill. Okay. So what I have shared with you is just a blank Google sheet that looks like the one that's on the screen, and it's in the LMS now. Before you begin to edit this, you want to go back and answer those questions that I just asked, and you want to make sure you make a copy for yourself. Okay, if this is the template and you start writing on it, your writing will become part of the template. If you want to build your own, they're very simple. Okay, you surely know enough where you could build this yourself in Google Sheets. Microsoft Excel is also very easy. You can even use Word or Docs by just inserting a table. Okay, so how do you build it? Well, you start by answering the questions from the last slide, and then once you're ready to dig into the table, you start here with the criteria. Okay, start with the criteria. Talk to your partner, think about it yourself. What are the skills and knowledge that a student would need to display or show in order to show that they have successfully transferred their understanding in this project? Okay, again, 3, 4, 5, maybe up to 7 different criteria is about the sweet spot. Then you don't want to go too much more than that. Okay. Next, the next step that you will tackle are the wording of your performance levels. Okay. The example that I showed earlier in this presentation, they're pretty informal, right? Good job, great job. That doesn't really give the learner very much information. Kind of what's standard for a 4-point rubric like this one would be level 3 would be meets. It meets the expectation, okay? And when you build it, you'll start at that meets the expectation level. If you have more than 4 performance levels, It might not be the one right below the top. It might be two down or something like that. But when you build it yourself, you want to start with whatever level you've decided meets the expectations. What you really want them to show you. Okay? So if level 3 is meets, level 4 might be exceeds expectations, level 2 might be approaching expectations, and level 1 might be below expectations. And if you're not comfortable with your performance levels, please just use those. Those will work. Those work very well. Okay, especially for a 4-point scale. Okay, so number 3, and again, this is kind of the heart or the meat of the rubric. These are your descriptors. And again, my suggestion is that you start with your meets level, in this case, number 3. And start by writing these. Try to capture in a sentence or 2 or 3 what you really expect based on this criteria. Okay, so again, in the example before, the top criteria was organization. So that teacher probably went to number 3 and said, what do I expect? What is a project that shows a deep level of understanding of this topic? What does the organization look like? And you want to describe that in as objective terms as you can. Avoid words like pretty or beautiful or things that can be argued one way or the other. You want your terminology to be as objective as you can. What would you see, right? Would it be well organized? Would it be neat, right? Would there be 6 features? Would there be 5, 4, right? So try to be as objective with your descriptors as you can be, okay? And you'll want to talk to your students about, if it is neat, what do you really mean by that? It's really good to talk about the rubric as you hand it out so that students are really clear, okay? Once you have the descriptors for the number 3 level, then I suggest you go up to number 4. So if a student exceeds each one of those, what would that look like, right? How would they exceed what you expect them to do, and add that to number 4? Use the same wording that you have in number 3. Just have it describe something that goes beyond what you expect. Once you're done with 4, then I suggest you move down to 2. And if this is your approaching level, what would be the same words, the same sentences that are in number 3, but not quite reaching the level that you expect? You can add those for number 2. And then number 1 is pretty easy, right? This would just be either a lack of evidence for this criteria or examples of really kind of poor performance. And again, you can use the same wording that you've used for the other 3 criteria, but you want to either describe it as unacceptable levels or non-existent. Okay? So those 3 will help you produce a criteria, or a rubric, sorry. Okay, so it's your turn. So again, here's that example that I showed early on. This is very basic, okay? There's not a lot in the descriptors. The performance levels are okay, not great, and the criteria are pretty general. But it's not a bad place to start. I think that you can produce something that's probably better than this. This is also very general, so you don't want to copy this because you are building your rubric for a specific task, the task that you have already developed this weekend, okay? So make sure that the language in your descriptors is targeted for your task. Okay, so just as a reminder, here are the questions that you need to answer as a team before you build your rubric, or before you jump into the table. It's easy to go to the table and start filling it in, but you really need the answers to these before you can design a strong rubric. Once you have these answers, your rubric will be aligned and it will actually build itself a lot faster. Okay, so again, here's another reminder slide. Once you've answered those questions, start with the criteria. Okay, that's step number one. Next, think and word your performance levels. Then, number three, inside your rubric, create the descriptors for all of the boxes. And then the last thing I'd like for you to do is to go back over the rubric. Ideally, it's only one page, so you don't want to have descriptors that are too long. You want to kind of space them out and think about the font that you use. It's nice when a rubric is one page and it's easy for students to move around with it and share it. Ensure that it assesses all of the skills and knowledge that you want to get out of your performance assessment without being too detailed. Finding that balance between the two. Okay. If you were in a classroom, you'd want to test it as well. You'd want to create your own performance assessment and assess yourself. Is the rubric too challenging? Is it too easy? And it's really good to revise and test your rubric before you distribute it, because once it's out there, it's pretty hard to change. Okay, last slide. Thanks for hanging in there with me. It's time to give it a try yourself. The rest of the afternoon you can dedicate to this. See how you can do. I'm sure you can do quite well. One of the best design parameters that we didn't really talk about in this lesson is that it's super powerful. All the advantages remain, but more are included if you actually include your students in the construction of the rubric. If they have some say in what that acceptable level looks like, what the language sounds like, there's all kinds of additional advantages that come to having your students help you build your rubric. But that's maybe the next level. For today, I wish you luck. Go ahead and build your rubric. Bring it with you to class on Tuesday. It's okay if it's just in draft form. We'll work on it and refine it during class. Okay? All right. Good luck, and I'll see you soon.